Thank you very much. I have a speech ready for you, but before that, I cannot resist having sat there for a few minutes listening to the last part of your conversation. You really have to indulge me in coming in on the last few questions that were raised. There's an old saying, it was probably Yogi Berra, all the funny things ever said are attributed to him, that said, if you don't know where you're going, you risk not getting there. Now, both Francois and Gregory are big champions of this global compact, having a lot of clarity of vision about where we should be in 20 years. I frankly agree with this. I don't think we're spending all this energy developing something for the next 2 years and then it's finished. We have to look over the horizon. The problem is, if we tell the truth about how ambitious we are on this agenda for where the world should be in dealing with human mobility in 20 years, we may scare away a lot of the players. And I'll give you an analogy. In one of my many, many previous lives, now almost exactly 21 years ago, I became the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Tribunals for the former Yugoslavian Rwanda. This was the first time the United Nations had ever done anything like that. If we had articulated what became the reality, which is that these tribunals would last 25 years, because they're not quite finished, would reach a point where their annual budget would be over $800 million a year, I think they would have shut us down right from the beginning. And frankly, we had no idea ourselves that it was going to take that long and that it was going to generate such a momentum. So I have to lead this global compact, the United Nations efforts to have the best possible global compact on migration. The time is very short, and we need your participation in these thematic consultations in every which way to ensure not only that we have the right vision, but that we have the right strategy, the right advocacy strategy to have deliverables. Now I'm going to give you my speech. It starts with, it's a great pleasure for me to be here, which I... Sorry. But it is true. You remember, apparently one US president, I don't know which one, at some point was said, well, Mr. President, you just said that last week. He said, I didn't say it, I just read it from my speech. This is not my case. What I'm telling you in this speech is true. I'm very happy to be with you. I spent a lot of time in these kinds of venues, also in my previous occupations. I enormously value your insight, your input, your contribution in your work. So we are on this journey towards a global compact on migration at a time, actually, where I don't have to tell you that xenophobia and anti-immigrant sentiments are on the rise in many parts of the world, and civil society has often been a critical voice in counteracting this toxic and dangerous atmosphere created by this expression of ignorance and hatred. And I heard you also today. This is not, you're not the only ones who have to take up this fight. I mean, responsibility is very widely shared, and political leadership has to be put at the forefront, I think, of this effort. So I don't need to encourage you to do more. I know you're out there, but I want to say that I recognize the importance of your engagement on this issue. And it's true that despite this overt hostility towards newcomers of all sorts, be it refugees or migrants, private citizens, François Crépeau mentioned a lot of private citizens in Canada, NGOs all over the world, increasingly in some sectors, business leaders have been stepping up to respond with great solidarity and courage in this very toxic climate. From rescuing at sea to providing medical services, distributing food, or providing shelter, civil society partners in the humanitarian sector have been instrumental in coping with the arrivals of refugees and migrants in many parts of the world. And again, I want to thank you and encourage you as you work on the development of policies that will push back on this phenomenon, to stay very engaged in supporting those who are the victims of this this current atmosphere. I know that the Civil Society Days are a crucial platform for you to develop and refine messages and joint advocacy towards member states, all moving towards a common agenda on migration. So I'd like to commend your working methods that you've developed over the years in this forum, right from the beginning. While the GFMD as a forum outside the United Nations is very different from the processes of the General Assembly, I equally count on you to participate and to bring your firsthand experience, expertise, and your commitment to the issues that will be at the core of this global compact process. And as was also mentioned when I first came into the room, we are halfway through the thematic consultations. There is a space for civil society. I understand it is at times very frustrating for you to find this space. The co-facilitators have been, in my opinion, doing everything they can to create a proper space for you to speak both in the context of member states deliberations and separately. And you can send us your written materials, views, and so on in preparation for what is called the zero draft, which will be the basis of member states' negotiations early next year. We have 3 thematic consultations still coming up, and I certainly would encourage you to be very actively involved. So last week in Geneva, we concluded the 3rd of the 6 thematic sessions. The very first one was on human rights, which I think was an appropriate way to launch this conversation about migration. We've had one on the drivers of migration, the pushes and pulls, the root causes. We've had this last one on migration governance at the international, regional, national level, with some trepidation that member states would be very sensitive on this question, but ultimately I think it was probably one of the better sessions, and we have 3 coming up, one in New York, Geneva, and Vienna, on migration and development, remittances, portability of benefits, which will overlap with the one on labor issues at the end, and the one in Vienna on trafficking, smuggling, and related issues. So for those of you who have special interest and expertise in some of these issues, I really encourage you to be there. The New York Declaration does present a unique opportunity, and we cannot afford to fall short in the expectations created by the Global Compact on Migration. By launching an intergovernmental process on international migration at the UN General Assembly for the first time in its history, the member states have acknowledged that a new framework for cooperation on international migration is necessary. And this framework will include cooperation between states, but will also need the expertise and participation of civil society organizations, academic institutions, as I said, the business sector, the labor movement. Essentially, this will call for a very large mobilizations, and I say including migrants themselves, which we say on every occasion, but again, as François Crépeau mentioned before, in some circumstances, they are uniquely silent by the very nature of their non-citizenship and, in some cases, their irregular situation in a country in which their rights need to be asserted. So it presents itself, I think, in a particularly challenging way. So I call on you, and the co-facilitators of this state-led process have also made that call before, to come up not only with your very strong sort of political policy advocacy, but with as much information, data, firsthand experience as you can provide, so that when we talk about changing the narrative on this issue, we have to move, but it will not happen in a few months, from this perception-driven agenda to a reality that is very often completely obscured by language, stereotypes, myths, perception. And this, again, will not happen overnight. It will not happen by itself. And frankly, we don't have the luxury of waiting for public opinion to be in the right place so that politicians can be guided by this sort of new wave of goodwill that will eventually emerge. It will not emerge in time, so the leadership has to come, I think, from the political sector to come back to enacting public policies that are evidence-based, fact-based, and not perception-based. And in large part, you hold a lot of that story. So now I think is the time to engage on these issues. I think it's also imperative that we move from a purely normative approach to listing, restating, reaffirming fundamental rights and principles, and shift towards concrete recommendations, deliverables that could form the basis of a global compact. And this, again, in the course of the current conversations, I have a sense that this is the preferable mood currently. There was a reference to the fact that even though there's no consensus on anything at this stage, but I think we hear pretty loud and clear a convergence amongst many member states towards a non-binding instrument, which could be a cause of alarm, but if it's non-binding but has a very solid political backup with operational deliverables, concrete measures, short-term, medium-term, longer-term, in the end, we may do better than we've done with some of the theoretically binding instruments that are so poorly ratified, such as the Convention on the Rights of Migrant Workers. Then at the end, we have an ambitious normative framework poorly implemented. On this one, in any event, the writing is on the wall. If the outcome is going to be a non-binding instrument, let's try to have one that's going to have a lot of wind in its sails, a lot of sort of political support, and therefore will be more implementable. So I've told you that. I count on you. I think I've told you that 3 or 4 times. I count on you. This is my 3rd point. It's not my 3rd. I've made about 5 or 6 points. Yeah, we need to build on existing mechanisms. There's a discussion that was going on this morning that I think is going to continue in the course of this year about the future of the GFMD, about its methodology as a multi-stakeholder platform, and whatever the configuration of the GFMD in the future, these features of its mode of operations, I think definitely will be very much worth preserving. There's been a lot of progress. People like to be reminded that 10 years ago you could not have a decent conversation, let alone a debate on migration inside a UN environment. I have a recollection when I was the High Commissioner for Human Rights, from 2004 to 2008, I think in our office, we had maybe 2 staff dedicated to working on migration-related issues. This was in the early days of what was called then the Geneva Migration Group, which was UNHCR, ILO, us, IOM, a handful of organizations. Today, it's not called the Geneva, it's called the Global Migration Group. It has 22 agencies coming together, and now maybe actually that has become a bit unruly. So going forward, we have to recognize how far we've come, both in terms of perception. Again, I don't want to be presumptuous about the outcomes of what is going to be a negotiated document, but I tell you, in the 3 months I've been in this job, the warnings I was getting at the outset about advocating for an increased variety of legal pathways, it doesn't seem so scary anymore. And when I first came in, lots of people were telling me, this is not going to be palatable. How can you tell people who think there are too many migrants coming into their country that the answer is more legal pathways? The politicians will not view that as an appropriate answer. Well, actually, there are lots of conversations about ways to tackle irregular migration by not forcing people into the asylum-seeking system in which they will fail, but opening pathways that will give them what they want, which at times is only short-term access to labor, to properly regulated labor market, not abusive underground economies. The conversation, I think, on these issues, even in the course of the last year or so, I think is, in my opinion, is moving in the right direction. So as for you as GFMD civil society actors, you've mobilized common messages and joint advocacies to member states since 2007. Over the years, I think we have seen much closer collaboration and convergence among civil society organizations, networks, inclusion of migrants, refugees, members of the diaspora. I think also another part of the narrative that has changed, and I think that will facilitate some of our advocacy, is the increased understanding that rather than think of the world as regions and countries of origin, transit, and ultimate destination, there's an increased, I think, recognition of the fact that many, I won't put numbers on it, countries are actually all three. The South-South interstate mobility is a phenomenon that is creating so-called return problems in countries that in the West are often thought of as countries of origin. This becomes very evident when they take the floor in some of these discussions. You will see a country taking the floor with the stereotype or the perception that this is a country of origin, but in fact their whole intervention is on their efforts to integrate migrants coming into their countries, their regularization efforts. So I think this brings a commonality of interest and will depolarize the discussion. So coming back to how best to contribute to this process, I urge you to think creatively where you can contribute. I think I told you that. I really want you to contribute. Again, I think this has been mentioned, the Office of the President of the General Assembly, my office, and the co-facilitators are really committed, and frankly, we're quite desperate to make sure that we harness the knowledge, the energy, the know-how that you've developed over the years. That's why we've decided to make all your written submissions that you put in the thematic sessions and that you send at the hearings, make all that available on our website. We really want to facilitate, to become a megaphone for your voices in this process. So in my role as the Secretary General of the 2018 conference, I would be very pleased to hear from you here or later. You can contact me if you have any ideas and suggestions beyond these written submissions that I encourage you to provide. If there's anything you wish to bring to my attention and to the attention of my very small but very dedicated team. We need bold ideas, but we need sort of strategic, principled practicalities, let's put it this way. Ideas that will be deliverable, again, short-term, medium-term, and with a vision for the 20, 30-year period, which I'm somewhat ambivalent about how clearly we should articulate that vision. I say that because I think in terms of policy development, there's no question we have to put in place something that will take us way down a long road. How specific we should be, for instance, on the kinds of demographic projections that for many people who are already anti-immigration are actually really scary. So it's in that sense that I have some ambivalence about the appropriate strategy of unpacking really the vision of the extent of human mobility in the decades ahead. Having said that, I'm absolutely persuaded that this will be an enriching experience for all, for the migrants themselves, for the people they leave behind and that they support currently with their extraordinary generosity of their remittances. This is an amazing case of the poor helping the poor compared to official development aid or private sector trade type investment. So all this, I think, will be on the increase in the future, will increase also the quality of life for migrants, for the people they leave behind, for the host communities that, if migration is properly managed, will improve the diversity, the commonality of countries of destination. So we're on to a very good thing in very challenging times. I'm delighted to have had this opportunity to talk to you, and I look forward to hearing your voice loud and clear in the months and the years to come. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much. Now we are going to give the floor to Blanca after the Louise Arbour's presentation. She's going to speak about what we can propose. Now we are going to talk about what is currently happening, about the effects of migration through Blanca's participation. I would ask the colleagues from Latin America to come to the stage with the photographs. We are going to listen Blanca for 5 minutes. She's going to speak about how the current migration policy is and its impact, to make a correlation between what we want from at the level of the civil society and the reality in our regions. Blanca, thank you very much for being here, and we hope that you can share with us many interesting things in your presentation. Thank you. It's an honor for me to be here today in this beautiful country with so many people that have welcomed us kindly. My name is Blanca Gómez. I come from Salvador in representation of all the families that have a relative that has disappeared. I am a part of a committee called COFAMIDE, which is composed of relatives of people that have died or have disappeared in their journey to the United States. I come also in representation of the mothers of Honduras, Mexico, and Nicaragua. I am the voice of all these mothers, fathers, and siblings that have a relative that has disappeared. I am a mother that is looking for her son. He disappeared in May 2010, and my brother disappeared in June 2013. I would like to thank Verdad and Justicia because they allowed me to be here. I know that many people would like to be here. We do not have many pictures, just a few. But I would like to tell you that it is difficult to live through this situation. Our children migrate not because they want to. And even if we should be free to travel wherever we want and live wherever we want, if the free movement was granted, migrants could go work wherever they want, come back to see the families, take the families to the place they want to work. But people who go to the United States or to other countries, they have to stay there, they have to be separated from the families. And what about those who died in the way? They also have the right for their remains to be sent back to their families. What about those about which we know nothing? This uncertainty of not knowing what happened to my son, what happened to my brother. We ask governments and states to look for our relatives, to take care of them, not to forget them, because we, as mothers, we are looking for them, we're still looking for them, and we will never get tired of looking for them. We will keep on fighting until we find them. Thank you for this space. I know that there are many people from different countries. I hope that you can be our voice in your countries. You need to know what is happening. All these things that our children are suffering, they are disappearing, they are suffering violence. We do not know where they are. They are sent to prison, and they are accused of crimes they did not commit. We have found young people who are 15 years old who are sent to prison, and their families know nothing about that. If governments did what they should do, or at least we would know where they are, then this anguish, this uncertainty would finish. I told my son when he decided to go, I don't recall when, but there was a year where there were 2 consecutive earthquakes. I had to ask for a loan to rebuild my house, and you have to pay for that loan. And he told me, I'm going to help you pay for the reconstruction. I'm going to help you repay that debt so that you don't have to work any longer, because I've been working for many years. That was my son's American dream. That was the dream he had. I told him he shouldn't go. We did not agree. I told him it's dangerous. But what I told him is that what I thought is that the migration department would send him to prison. But this American dream became a nightmare for everyone. Thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you, Blanca. We love you. Thank you. As women, we fight for our children, and also fathers. The fathers also do their work. Thank you very much. Thank you, Blanca. Thank you, Louise. Thank you, dear colleagues. I would like to thank you for listening. It is important to take into account what the realities that we are speaking about are, what people are being impacted, and what we want to change with this global compact. We do not want anyone else disappearing. We do not want to have mothers that need to look for the children because governments do not grant access to justice. We want the free movement of people, and with this panel, we are going to talk about what we can do in the future, about the opportunities that Louise Arbour put on the table, and about the realities that Blanca spoke about. We are going to see what we can do, how we can change these policies and these paradigms, and how they affect our realities and our families. We are going to open the floor. Ms. Arbour is going to leave in a few minutes because she is going to participate in the common spaces with governments. We are going to have 3-4 questions, just quickly, so that Louise Arbour and Blanca can answer.
Carolina Gotardo from the Women in Migration Network. Primero decirle a
First of all, I would like to tell my colleagues from the disappeared people in Salvador is that it is important to see what the impact is on the lives of people, and we are fighting women, and we want to show you our solidarity.
to Louise Arbour. It was great that you are encouraging civil society to participate and to raise our issues, and we certainly will raise up to the challenge. I want to ask you, how do you see the compact responding to the very specific challenges that migrant and refugee women are facing in the context, because we are agents of change, but actually the punitive migration policies are affecting us in very specific ways. So that's the first part of the question. And the second part is, how do you foresee the participation of migrant women and migrant women organizations as crucial parts or key parts to develop the compact? Thank you.
Otra pregunta acá.
Another question here.
Lookout from the Organization for Undocumented Migrant Workers in Belgium, also pick a member. My question is, what I'm hearing about the compact of the 3 sessions that have passed already, is that what for me seemed to be standard already, the human rights framework for all humans, seems to be put in question, certainly for people who are undocumented, and it seems to be going in a direction of for human rights are for humans with the right papers and not for humans, point. So my question is this something we really have to worry about? Is this something that we will find solutions for? Or, and who are the partners we can cooperate with to get human rights for all humans, with or without documents?
Una última pregunta, por favor.
One last question. The lady in red.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am working with migrants in India. I'm a MFA member. I really want to thank the possibilities of raising the voices being heard, just like the persons who have just demonstrated themselves. I just want to bring the cries of migrant workers who are in the Middle East, who are behind the closed doors, who do not have access to service, who do not even see their faces seen, a lot of trafficking taking place in the name of labor migration, and the possibilities of their voices being heard, and the governments to listen to these voices, both sending and receiving countries, and to raise this issue together with the international government to look at these realities and find possibility to respond to them, to these families who are crying, and thousands of women who have gone either dead, we do not know, missing sisters whose dead bodies come day after day, who are no more. We do not know where they are lost. So the need for searching for them, to letting possibilities for these voices to be heard, and to let the government find possibilities. We are willing to work with them to find possibilities of letting these families be heard. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias. Vamos a cerrar.
Thank you very much. We are going to close. Thank you for your message. We are going to give the floor to Louise Arbour so that she can answer.
Thank you. I have to apologize that I will have to leave. There are lots of activities in this global forum, and I seem to have to try to touch base on all of them. So I will just briefly answer the questions that were put to me. On the question of women in migration, I have to say that we've had excellent input, in particular inside the UN system from UN Women. We are working, and I hope that we'll see very specific language in the compact itself dealing with the specific situation of women, not only because on labor issues, and that comes to maybe the question that was put to me, they are overly represented in this informal economy and in probably the most dangerous parts of this informal economy, in private care sector, completely isolated from each other. So as we try to promote the opening of legal pathways as a way of combating the abuses that come from irregular migration, I think the situation of women is going to be very prevalent. It will be equally important, I think, in this discourse that we don't emphasize uniquely the specific vulnerabilities of women, particularly when we come to trafficking and so on, but we speak about the agency of women and the amazing force in terms of their contribution to remittances, for instance. Proportionately, women contribute a larger share of their earnings to remittances. So the agency of women on the move, I think, is going to have to be, I hope, will be very specifically addressed, recognized in the Global Compact. The question of undocumented migrants, if I could speak to the positive, First of all, language is critical on a lot of these issues, and frankly, I find it already a little bit encouraging that for the most part, at least in polite society, we talk about undocumented or irregular migrants as opposed to illegal or worse, criminal. We've already made a little bit of progress just through the implementation of an appropriate use of language there. That's already a helpful step in addressing this issue. Again, when you talk about xenophobia, intolerance, anti-migrant sentiments, when you address these issues with people, they don't like anybody, a lot of them. And frankly, there's a portion of the general public that may be beyond reach in any kind of rational argument. But for those who I think we have to address with some respect, their possibly misguided but very genuine fear, including fear about the future of their own identities and so on. So if you engage in serious conversation about these people, very often they will acknowledge the contribution of regular, highly skilled, well-integrated migrants who've been in their communities for a very long time. Then, that takes a little harder conversation, but you might actually make some progress on the issue of refugees, where people come to understand that, quote, it's not their fault, and that it has an appeal to a kind of charitable instinct. When you come to irregular migrants, the cheaters, the so-called economic migrants who cheat, it's a lot more difficult to change that narrative. So from a human rights perspective, it's not just rhetorical to say we need always to start with the most vulnerable, and the highest level of vulnerability in migration is irregularity, because then there is not only no opportunity to self-assert rights, but it's very difficult to mobilize support in public opinion. Yet it is happening. The so-called sanctuary cities that have enacted some types of firewalls, not always as strict as we might like them to be, but there is a sense in many communities that this issue needs to be addressed, and that governments should also look at the tolerance that they show for their abusive underground economies that in which these irregular migrants find a very undesirable home, sometimes for years and years. I believe that on this issue, we should be able to make considerable progress in the Global Compact, and this is one area where I think the change of the narrative is going to come from a change of policy and not the other way around. So thank you very much. These are issues that are going to be with us in the months ahead. You're right at the heart of the issues that are going to be debated in the Global Compact. Thank you very much for having me. I'm going to leave you to your deliberations. All the best.
Muchas gracias, Luis.
Thank you very much, Louise. Thank you very much, Blanca. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here. I know that you are here because you are sensitive to our fight. It is. Well, I don't wish anyone to live this pain that we are all suffering, and I hope that the authorities of the transition countries can do more efforts in order for the situation to improve, because they have to be in our shoes to understand us. They are fathers and mothers as well. They need to understand us. Mothers can sympathize with other mothers. I went to request a visa to the U.S. Embassy, and they denied me the visa because I was going to go there to demonstrate. So how can our children request a visa to move freely? If they could request a visa to move freely, then they wouldn't need to pay to these traffickers, because we need to pay a trafficker for him to go and to make him and he disappeared afterwards. So we had the doubt, the debt and then this uncertainty because we do not know what happened to them. Thank you, Blanca. I'd like to thank the two panelists